Hello and welcome to this edition within the Border People podcast series. My name is Anthony Suarez and I'm the Acting Director of the Centre for Cross-Border Studies. It's my pleasure to look at today the question of Brexit and how that might affect the operation of the 1998 Belfast or Good Friday Agreement. What are the potential consequences of the UK's departure from the European Union? How do the negotiations around the UK's departure from the Union, how are they looking at the Good Friday Agreement, and what might we be seeing in the future in terms of what the current position is of the UK government and of the European Union in relation to the Good Friday Agreement. So if we actually go back to the formal moment at which the UK announced formally that it was leaving the European Union, which is when the Prime Minister at the time, Theresa May, sent her letter to Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council, on the 29th of March 2017, which set then this two-year process of negotiations over the UK's withdrawal. Within that letter, the UK Prime Minister outlined a number of priorities for the UK government as it started or was about to start that negotiation process. So there were a number of key elements within that if we're looking particularly at the island of Ireland, Northern Ireland and the Republic, and the relationship between Ireland and the UK. And amongst those priorities, we see very clearly in that formal letter that was the trigger to the Article 50 process, the negotiation process of the UK's withdrawal. Those priorities included no return to a hard border, maintaining the common travel area, a priority that doesn't seem to be spoken about that much recently, which was within the letter, the UK Prime Minister Theresa May set out how the UK's withdrawal should not harm the Republic of Ireland. And finally, the desire to uphold the 1998 Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And some of those terms we have heard repeatedly in terms of no return to a hard border, whatever that might actually mean in practice, the maintenance of the common travel area. And we have heard on various occasions this desire to uphold, to respect the Good Friday Agreement. However, it's important that we actually look at that, return to that 1998 agreement, because the formal phrase that has been used on numerous occasions, both by the UK government and by the European Union, by the Commission, throughout these negotiations in relation to the Good Friday Agreement, is how they set out, both sides have set out, how the UK's withdrawal should do nothing to undermine the Good Friday Agreement in all its parts, is the phrase that is used repeatedly. But one of the questions here is, how do we ensure that the Good Friday Agreement is not undermined in any of its parts if as a result of the UK's departure from the European Union? So it's important for us to kind of remind ourselves of what the Good Friday Agreement actually represents in a kind of very outline, in a broad fashion, but it is important that we remind ourselves and actually take time to go back to the 1998 agreement and to look at what it actually represents. So in terms of its general elements, it has three particular or main strands to it. Strand one, which is the strand devoted to Northern Ireland itself and the institutions within Northern Ireland. And this obviously refers to the Northern Ireland Assembly and the executive, this new power-sharing assembly and executive that was created as a result of the 1998 agreement. So strand one, really, if we look at the geography of it, of what it represents, it is Northern Ireland. Strand two then is the north-south element, the element that looks at the relationship between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland and the formal institutions that were created as a result of the 98 agreement to support and to foster that north-south relationship. So in terms of the institutions, the central one here in terms of the North-South relationship is the North-South Ministerial Council, which brings together the ministers of the two administrations, the Northern Ireland Assembly and its executive in particular, and the Irish government from the Republic of Ireland that meet on a regular basis, or should meet on a regular basis. Although obviously in the current context, that body cannot function at a political level without a functioning assembly and executive in Northern Ireland. But also in terms of that strand too, in terms of formal structures, we also saw the creation of 6 implementation bodies, a range of implementation bodies, including, for example, the Special EU Programs Body, the SEUPB, which manages EU funding programs. Crucially, for North-South cooperation, we look at the Interreg program and the unique program here for the island of Ireland, the Peace Programme. But we have other implementation bodies such as Waterways Ireland. We also have Intertrade Ireland that looks at all island trade. And we also have an additional body, it's not a formal implementation body, but we also have Tourism Ireland that promotes the island of Ireland as a tourism destination abroad to audiences abroad. So that's the strand 2 element. And then we have a further strand 3, that is actually looking at broader relationships. That's the relationship between the island of Ireland and Great Britain. So the administrations there, including obviously the central government, the UK government based in London and Westminster, but it also includes the devolved administrations in Scotland and Wales, and it also includes the Isle of Man and the Channel Islands. And all of these administrations, so the Irish government, the administration in Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, etc., are gathered together in a formal structure, the British Irish Council, that brings all of those administrations together. But there is another formal body on the strand 3, which is the British Irish Intergovernmental Conference, which is uniquely a body bringing together the Irish and UK government that look at issues that are not devolved to Northern Ireland, and looks at North-South cooperation and East-West cooperation as well. So very broadly speaking, those are the 3 strands that make up the Good Friday Agreement. So we have to remind ourselves of that as we look at how the negotiations over the UK's withdrawal and the actual withdrawal itself, how might they affect the operation of these 3 strands, remembering that the Good Friday Agreement underlines the fact that all of these strands are interlinked, they're interlocking, particularly strands 1 and 2, that strand 2 cannot operate without strand 1 being functioning, which is actually the current case that we have without a Northern Ireland devolved assembly functioning at the moment. So in terms of the negotiations over the UK's withdrawal, a good document to look at, a good way to kind of summarise the positions of the UK government on one side of the negotiating table and the European Union on the other is the joint report that was issued back in December 2017, which kind of looked at the agreed position of the 2 negotiating teams on how things were going and how they saw things proceeding. And it's from there we actually get many of the elements in this joint report became part of what we have now as the withdrawal agreement that is obviously failed to pass within the House of Commons, but what we have here really does inform that withdrawal agreement. So it's important to look at then what did the UK and the EU jointly see as the position of the 1998 the Good Friday Agreement within that context of the UK's impending withdrawal from the European Union. So both sides, and it's important to emphasize that it's both sides, they together came up with this joint report. In one of the paragraphs within that joint report, which in this section is looking particularly at the island of Ireland, they both say that they agreed that the Good Friday Agreement that was reached in 1998 by the UK and Irish government must be, and here we have the phrase, must be protected in all its parts, and that this extends to the practical application of the 1998 agreement on the island of Ireland and to the totality of the relationships set out in the agreement. Now, so it's important just to pause here again, must be protected in all its parts, which we could understand as meaning all three strands, the strand dealing with just Northern Ireland, strand 2 dealing with a north-south element, but also strand 3, which is what we refer to as the east-west strand, the relations between the island of Ireland and Great Britain. But it also refers here to the practical application of the agreement. And here's where we see an emphasis on the operation of the various institutions, the various bodies that were created under the 1998 agreement, including, of course, the North-South Ministerial Council, but also the implementation bodies, those bodies charged with North-South cooperation, such as Waterways Ireland, such as Intertrade Ireland. So here we see this desire that the UK's withdrawal from the European Union should not in any way affect the operation, in this case, of North-South implementation bodies and the wider North-South cooperation field and wider cross-border cooperation activities that have been undertaken since the 1998 agreement. We see again in that joint report and in the negotiations that have been taking place over the UK's withdrawal from the European Union, this commitment, recalling in this particular case the United Kingdom, recalling its commitment to protecting the operation of the agreement. So the operation, here again we're talking about North-South cooperation, but also we could say East-West cooperation as well, and including subsequent implementation agreements and arrangements, because obviously the 1998 agreement was followed by several other agreements, including, for example, the St Andrews Agreement. But here we see in this particular paragraph from the joint report very specific references to the institutions and to the bodies that were established under that 1998 agreement and subsequent agreements. And here again in the joint report we see a reference to the avoidance of a hard border, including any physical infrastructure or related checks and controls. Now, the two things aren't necessarily disconnected, this desire to avoid a hard border and also this commitment to ensure the continued operation of the North-South cooperation or the North-South implementation bodies. Because we can kind of see if there was a hard border or if there was any physical infrastructure or checks and controls, that any type of such impediment is going to affect the operation of the North-South institutions and cross-border cooperation in general. So it's important to bear that in mind, that this is seen as something that needs to be avoided as the UK withdraws from the European Union. Again, in terms of the 1998 agreement, and here's where we reach a particularly tricky issue, potentially tricky issue, is that in that joint report that then goes on to inform the withdrawal agreement that we have at the moment, both parties here in this paragraph within the joint report, both parties talking about how they recognise the need to respect the provisions of the 98 agreement regarding the constitutional status of Northern Ireland and the principle of consent. And then it goes on to speak specifically about the United Kingdom and how it continues to respect and support fully Northern Ireland's position as an integral part of the United Kingdom, consistent with the principle of consent. So the principle of consent set out in the 1998 agreement in terms of the constitutional status of Northern Ireland, how it remains within as part of the United Kingdom until the people of Northern Ireland decide otherwise, is referred to here. It's referred to again in the withdrawal agreement. So we could say that the withdrawal agreement that flows from this joint report does not of itself threaten at all the constitutional status of Northern Ireland, as it is here stated that is to be respected. However, we then have to deal with the politics flowing from that in terms of what is the UK's position at the moment in terms of how it intends to withdraw from the European Union. How does that affect what was said in the joint report published by the two sides jointly, by the UK government and the European Union, but also what does the UK's current position in terms of how it wishes to withdraw from the European Union enable, support what is set out in the withdrawal agreement, specifically in terms of what the Belfast Good Friday Agreement created, set up in terms of North-South cooperation, the institutions and the bodies that they were to support that cooperation, to implement that cooperation, which is an integral part of the 1998 agreement. And here we come to really the crucial element, or the crucial stumbling block in terms of potential stumbling block in terms of how we are to respect, to fulfill that duty set out repeatedly of not undermining the Good Friday Agreement in any of its parts. The conundrum is, how is that to be achieved as the UK government's current position continues to be that the UK will withdraw not just from the European Union, but will also withdraw from the customs union and the European Union single market. Those things have enabled, facilitated the smooth operation at a practical level, at an operational level, of the implementation bodies and the various institutions, the North-South institutions, but also, we would suggest, some of the relations that are East-West between the island of Ireland and Great Britain. It's very hard to see at the moment how that smooth operation can continue as the UK government's position continues to be withdrawal, not just from the European Union, but from the customs union and single market. So it's important for us to remind ourselves again of what all of the parts are, the constituent elements are of the Good Friday Agreement, how they interrelate to each other. And we really do have to ask ourselves, in terms of the UK's withdrawal from the European Union, does that withdrawal in any way jeopardize the totality of relations that are established and that are supported by the Good Friday Agreement? And I'll leave you to ponder that one. Thank you.